Good morning. Welcome back to another Duval 22 podcast. My name is Gus Logue. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by JP Acosta of CBS Sports in the Pushing the Pile podcast. He's an SB Nation's Big Cat Country alumnus, so always glad to have JP on. But especially this time of year, the NFL Combine is coming up this week, so we're mostly going to do a little bit of an NFL Combine preview with JP. But JP, I mean, one of those analysts that I always learn from anytime I read his work or listen to his work, but especially when it comes to draft coverage. So really excited to get JP's thoughts just on what lies ahead for our hometown Jacksonville Jaguars. JP, welcome back to the show. How's the offseason been for you so far, my man?
It's going great now that there's definitely less football to talk about and get
Mm,
more into analyzation of draft prospects, free agencies coming up. Like the league year is coming up real soon, so everything's about to get really busy again. But it's been good, kind of get a little breather after the season ended.
definitely. Yeah, I needed that myself. I don't think I did a podcast last week, but I'll do a podcast next week with Shipley, probably breaking down like everything we heard from the combine and what lies ahead. But JP, one interesting thing, especially regarding the Jaguars for the combine, is that it was recently reported, even though it's not really any big news, that head coach Liam Coen and general manager James Gladstone will not be attending this year's NFL Combine. They did go to the one last year, but I think it's because they were like hired in January. There was a lot of onboarding that they needed to do, so it's kind of like easier for their operations to go last year. But this year and going forward, we're not expecting the Jaguars' head coach or general manager to be there in present, which means they won't be doing interviews in front of the press, which is a little bit of a bummer because we always learn something whenever they talk in front of a microphone. But I feel like the combine is especially a good opportunity to learn something. But the real reason, like they kind of got the strategy from the Rams. Les Snead and Sean McVay have been doing this for years. And the kind of reason is to remove bias from in-person interviews. The Jaguars also would not be conducting top 30 quote unquote visits where prospects come into Jacksonville and interview with them. Like obviously those like one-on-one sessions can be valuable, but again, the Jaguars are trying to remove bias and focus more on like the data points that they definitely know. So JP, I'm just kind of curious on definitely a lot of people got like up in arms about this, like, oh, I can't believe they're skipping the combine, but the combine is really just like it's always been like all about medicals more than anything. And so I didn't know if you have any thoughts or like kind of pros or cons that are at the top of your head about the Jaguars' top brass not being there.
So there's a short answer and a long answer. The short answer is if you know how a guy moves, you don't need to see them move without pads on.
There you
Like
go.
if you can tell that a guy is an elite mover, forwards, backwards, laterally, if you could tell a guy is an elite mover, you don't need to take all the football pads off of him to see that. That's sort of what the combine is. The combine, you try and get them into a sterilized environment, no pads, you're not hitting anybody, and you're just running. You're doing athletic workouts. But the biggest thing about the combine is people put, and I use people like royally, the royal we put
Mm.
too much stock into workouts that don't matter as much. Like the 40-yard dash is very cool. It
Very.
does not matter
No.
when it comes to like football because you're not running 40 yards in a straight line with no pads on and nobody trying to force you to move laterally or changing direction. Where you really want to watch like the combine is through like the jumps and the lateral movement stuff. That's the stuff that'll really stick when it comes to NFL evaluation. But I also think the Jaguars and what they've learned from Sean McVay and what they've learned from the Rams is they go and get the GPS tracking data from teams in college football, from the Senior Bowl, from the Shrine Bowl. I'm sure that the Jaguars were at the Senior Bowl this year. I didn't see any Jaguar scouts there when I was in there in person, like per se, but I do think the Jaguars were there. They were able to get that evaluation. And we saw last year with the draft, a large majority of their players that they picked were Senior Bowl alums. Basil Tootin was a Senior Bowl alum. LaQuint Allen, Jack Kaiser, Caleb Bransaw, Wyatt Milam. Outside of Travis Hunter, a large majority of that draft class were Senior Bowl alums. So I think they're going to get a lot of their investment from that. It's very similar to what the Rams did and the Rams do. So I'm not super worried about it because if you're so hung up on watching these guys work out in shorts and t-shirts, then you can go and watch an off-season practice in college football to know which guys you want.
Yeah, I think it's mostly just interesting to me because Gladstone especially harps on that phrase, intangibly rich, obviously they want to bring in high character individuals to the building, and so like maybe it's a little bit tougher to do that if you can't actually meet the individuals one on one. Like I feel for the prospects a little bit where if it's like I mean, it's probably the way to go, honestly, where you're relying more so on the word of like coaches and teammates and other people as opposed to the prospect just being like, I love football and I really want to get drafted highly. It's like a cover letter for a job, honestly. Like, I feel like the Jaguars are just skipping the cover letter section of like when people are like, this is my dream job. I want this job so bad. You have no idea how bad I want it. And they're just like, just give us like your experience and like your medicals and your measurables and all that stuff. Again, give us like the data points so that we can remove the bias. But I do think it's an interesting point about like how the Jaguars last year, but then the Rams in general have gotten a lot of prospects from the Senior Bowl and from like the Shrine Bowl and kind of like those types of events in January and February. I wonder if I would assume they're not doing like formal or official interviews with prospects, but maybe just those opportunities allow them to see a little bit under the hood of like what intangibles a guy does or does not have. And so, JP, love what you said about how there's like kind of some drills that are important and some that aren't as important. So look out for jumps and kind of lateral ability drills. What else are you looking out for this week? The last time you came on a podcast with us to break down Jacksonville's wild card round loss. And so here are a few names that you shout out last time. They're all along the defensive line. Penn State's Zane Durant, Arkansas's David Oki, Texas A&M Cassius Howell, Oklahoma's R. Mason Thomas, and Ohio State's Kenyatta Jackson Jr. Are you like interested in any of those names or any other names in terms of like how much does their measurables like weigh up against how I think their athleticism shined on tape versus like meeting certain I guess thresholds and because like arm length is a pretty obvious one where it's like a lot of teams will have thresholds where it's like if you're below for various positions a certain threshold, a certain number, then you're essentially like off a team's board. And so again, JP, like kind of player specific, what are players that you're watching for this week that you think could like boost or decline their stock?
So the first one that you mentioned was R. Mason Thomas. I'm a huge fan of his game. I have been since last year, Oklahoma. He's a little undersized, probably going to come in around 6'1.5", probably going to be about 250 pounds, not going to have 33-inch arms. But when you watch the dude play at Oklahoma, he has the best bend in this entire draft class. And we talk about bend like there are some players who we categorize as explosive and bendy, and then there's R. Mason Thomas who actually has like bend. And we talk about bend is getting under guys, being able to flatten and sink your hips, but also being able to have that flexibility in your ankles to turn the corner when you get to the high side of the pass rusher, where we see a lot of guys when they try and run the hoop, they get pushed around and the quarterback can step up. R. Mason Thomas can flatten that corner really well and get to the quarterback. His biggest issue is he had a quad injury this past season that sort of sidelined him. And again, he's 250 pounds with not that great, like not that long of arms. So he's gonna get beat up a little bit in the run game by tackles, but you're not gonna see him get beat up by tight ends. He is a monster in the run game when you try and like block him with a tight end. But I do think he has the football intelligence. He has the football character. He came back for his last season at Oklahoma, despite like a lot of people telling him to enter the draft last season. But I do think he's a guy that I'm really, really, really interested in. You mentioned Cassius Howell, who is another guy who's a little bit explosive. I think he has less bend than R. Mason Thomas, but he wins as a counter rusher. He uses speed to force tackles to open up the window inside, and then he can spin back inside or he swim moves back inside. That's his entire game. He's going to use his speed to set up the inside counters. It's really similar to a guy that's like sort of like Alex Highsmith from the Steelers, where he's going to use that speed to set up everything else off of that and the
Mhm.
inside counters. His problem is he's got short arms. And from there, like how do you sort of evaluate players who are like these freaks with speed and bend, but also don't really have the arm length to be a factor in the run game? And that's where Cassius Howell's deficiencies come up, is like he uses all that speed, but he can't really use it in the run game. And so you're having to design stunts and loops to try and get him crashing into gaps instead
Mhm.
of being able just to hold an edge, because there aren't many guys in the NFL right now who are like sub 260 pounds who you'd call like one of the better edge defenders in the NFL. I mean, Micah Parsons is like a unique one of one prospect, one of one player who can do that at his size. But I do think when you look at the edges, I think you look at defensive tackle, we're going to see a lot of this year in the defensive tackle class. There's a lot of nose tackles, not a lot of three techs.
Hmm.
So, like last year is a lot of three techs, not a lot of nose tackles. This year is sort of inverted. So, I think seeing how guys like win with their length, win with power, I want to see how those guys move laterally, the quickness, because run defense, I said on a podcast the other day, run defense will set your floor, but pass rush sets the ceiling. How high you can go in this draft class. And if you're like in a similarly ranked group with other nose tackles, how you affect the passer is going to be what separates you.
Yeah, it's interesting about the arm length because I feel like with the speed, like you're immediately like valuable on third downs. But then the question is like, can you kind of, I mean, A, be able to survive on run downs as you pointed out, but then B, even like on third downs, being able to provide more as a pass rusher beyond just like an instant pressure off of the edge. Like that's obviously very nice to have, but like you want a little bit more than that when like you're going against offensive tackles that are solid and against like have the lateral ability to contain speed rushers and then like because once your speed rush is done like where do you go to from there? I think that's one thing that like makes Josh Hines Allen really good is that like he doesn't really have like a dominant like move. Does have a pretty nice club rip, but like he's just really good at like kind of doing moves off of moves, and I think he's especially good at kind of like setting up moves for later in the game and then beating up offensive tackles that way. So obviously the Jaguars do need to add to their defensive line room this offseason, so it'll be interesting to see how they go about it. Sticking in the combine, JP, kind of just a straightforward question. Who do you think is going to be like the biggest winner of the combine? Like, who do you think is going to be someone that like everyone is going to be talking about a week from now? Like recent combine winners that come to mind, like Roma Dunze, everyone loved Matthew Golden, Troy Fautano, everyone like he did like one drill and looks like a wide receiver out in space, and everyone, including myself, fell in love with him because of that. And so, anyone that you think from this year's combine will really make a name for themselves?
So the first guy that came up when we started talking was Casey Concepcion, a wide
Mm.
receiver from Texas A&M, transfer from NC State, where NC State had him sort of like, hey, we're just going to try and get him the ball as quickly and as much as possible. They set him up with screens. They had him running jet sweeps. Texas A&M had him run a lot more real routes, and you saw him sort of blossom as a receiver with his route running. The problem with him is he doesn't have the greatest hands. His
Mm.
drop rate is very concerning, but he is one of, if not the best separator in this draft class. Just using pure speed, agility, the ability to start and stop is what really stands out when you watch him. His ability to decelerate is really nice. So I do think he's going to really take over this combine, especially if Jordan Tyson, Carnell Tate, and Mekhi Lemon, the top three receivers, don't test, which I'm assuming Jordan Tyson won't test because like of all the injury and medical stuff. Like he just won't, he'll just keep his like time to himself and go do it at the pro day. Carnell Tate doesn't really have to, and Mekhi Lemon also doesn't really have to, but Concepcion can really stand out. Arizona State tackle Max Ahineker, uh, a very, very interesting story. He didn't start playing college football until junior college. He was a high school soccer and basketball player who sort of grew too big to play soccer. So you can tell the athleticism and the feet of a soccer player when you watch him play. He's got a really long runway for growth, but the movement skills are really going to stand out. A lot of this tackle class can make a lot of money at this combine because they all have the requisite athleticism and foot speed to really be like someone that stands out. Like Monroe Freeling from Georgia, probably going to be the first like true tackle off the board come April. He might be the first offensive lineman off the board come April because he's got the prototypical like tackle size, length, movement skills, and he finished the season really strong. Utah's Caleb Lomu is really light. I think he's going to like weigh in at maybe 308 pounds, but he's got such great movement skills and hands, and he's also really young. Blake Miller from Clemson, 35 plus inch arms. Again, a little bit smaller, but he's got the foot speed and the length to be like, oh, if he tests, he's probably going to get put into like back into round one because you're not going to find many guys that size. But defensively, I also think You're going to see a lot of guys like you. Linebacker is going to be really strong. Jake Golday from Cincinnati is probably going to be the one that stands out the most because I just wonder if Sonny Styles and Arvell Reese even test. Like I hope
Yeah.
they do because they break everything at the
Hmm.
combine, but they don't really have to. Jake Golday, former defensive end at I believe Central Arkansas. Transferred up to Cincinnati, played off-ball linebacker for 2 years, 6'4", 240. It's very funny watching him on the Cincinnati tape because he's the biggest person on the field playing
Mm.
off-ball linebacker. It's very funny, and you can tell that he still like plays like an edge when it comes to taking on pullers outside the box because he's really good at that, but also doesn't really have like the knowledge of taking on blocks inside the tackle box. But he's super athletic going forward. He's really explosive. I think he's going to do really well in the jumps. And in this safety class, this corner class has a lot of athletes.
Mm.
I wonder if Jamal McCoy tests. I hope he does because he missed this entire season, but he's going to run really well. Avion Terrell is going to run well. Chris Johnson from San Diego State is going to run really well. He's going to test really well. Also, an elite special teamer. So if you're looking for any guy like that can be like the intangibly rich guy at 56 that you're looking for at corner, Chris Johnson Jr. from San Diego State, probably going to be the guy they picked there. Safety, Genesis Smith is going to run really well. AJ Halsey from LSU going to run really well. So I'm looking to see guys that I think those guys are really going to see their names start popping up, especially after a good week at the combine.
Awesome. Love the list. You mentioned offensive tackle, and I think that's an interesting group because it feels like there's not really consensus at the top. Feels like there's like a large handful of guys that like could be the first overall or the first tackle taken, or like it feels like tackles 1 through 6 are like just in various orders. And so I think that's definitely a position group that like we'll learn a lot about, and we'll kind of like be able to make various updates to rankings, everything like that after this week. And so, in terms of positions, like, are there any other position groups that you're interested in that capacity that you're kind of interested to see like who like breaks away and kind of like reveals himself as like the top of the pack, or like maybe like it's a thin position group and you're wondering like if there's really going to be anyone else, or if it really is going to be a thin group. Yeah.
I'm specifically focused on the defensive tackles, which, of course, if you know me, I'm always watching defensive line play.
Mm.
But I'm specifically focusing on this group of nose tackles that we have in this draft class: Lee Hunter from Texas Tech, Cade McDonald from Ohio State, Christian Miller from Georgia, Daryl Jackson Jr. from Florida State, and Dominique Orange from Iowa State. All guys who are just these big, long, strong, like ready-made run defenders, but are also like the things that'll delineate them from each other in this really like swamped group of like once you get past Caleb Banks at defensive tackle, Caleb Banks and Peter Woods, it's
Hmm.
wide open. And
Okay.
so you have a bunch of these nose tackles here, and how they all will like delineate themselves is how can you affect the quarterback? I think Lee Hunter has had the most production and has the most potential to immediately do that. Christian Miller is another guy from Georgia. He has the athleticism and he has shown that he can win as a pass rusher. But coming from that Georgia defense, you don't really see them get to rush the passer like in a true sense a lot. So that's going to be really that evaluation is going to be really tough. Then you get to Kaden McDonald from Ohio State, who is a little bit more of a like you put him in the middle of your run defense and you do not worry about it. You don't have him on third downs because he's not really going to affect the quarterback. So you worry a little bit about the upside there when it comes to rushing the passer, but he's also very young. Um, then you have guys like Daryl Jackson Jr., Dominique Orange, a little bit older prospects, big, long. They don't really affect the passer. They are more ready-made run defenders. So I'm curious how all those guys test because you can show the potential for pass rush ability if you have the lateral movement, the explosiveness. I want to see how they like go through pass rush drills at the combine. So I'm really excited to see how that group of nose tackles sort of separates himself from the pack.
Well, that's a perfect segue into kind of our next topic, which is just general Jaguars draft strategy. Maybe I can contribute a little bit more here, but especially for defensive tackle, like I wanted to ask you how you think the Jaguars' roster strengths and weaknesses compare to how like thin or deep position groups are in the draft. And so I think defensive tackle is a good one to start out with because I definitely think back to Mason Smith too, and I think that's kind of a good example of like weighing positions and how deep or not deep they are in the class is like the Jaguars took Mason Smith, like partly I'm sure because they were interested in him as an individual prospect, but also because they knew that like by the time they had another pick in the draft, it was going to be the third round, and like defensive tackles with pass rush upside just like are not available in like after day two. And so they like if you're going to take a shot on someone like that, like it typically needs to be a top 50 pick. And so I'm curious, JP, like, do you think that the Jaguars should feel like similarly this year where like we need some like quality, just disruptive pass rushers? We need to make sure we take one early before like it all dries up. Or are there like some interesting like flyers you think they could take along the defensive line later in the rounds and they don't necessarily need to pigeonhole themselves? Just like, what are your thoughts in that regard?
So defensive tackle is really fascinating because I think for the Jaguars, it also depends on what you do with Eric Armstead and Devon Hamilton this
Right.
offseason. Because given what the strength is at nose tackle for this class, like I talked about that group of nose tackle that's sort of borderline round one, like round two caliber players, they all sort of like, especially Dominique Orange, Daryl Jackson Jr., they're both very similar to Devon Hamilton in terms of run stopping, but with limited pass rush capability. So if you're looking to upgrade from Devon Hamilton, you want somebody who's a little more well-rounded. But I also think if you're going to completely skip out on defensive tackle in round two, where all those nose tackles are, I do think there's some pretty interesting prospects, especially like Chris McClellan from Missouri is a guy who's a little bit more undersized, a little more of a pass rusher. Grayson Halton from Oklahoma is my favorite, like day three, like or maybe we'll get into round three prospect. He's really undersized, but he wins with such quickness, agility, and he's always winning on stunts and pass rush games, which is
Mm.
something that you really saw from Anthony Campanelli this season as the Jaguars defensive coordinator. So I think when it comes to the defensive tackle class, it depends on what you want to do with Eric Armstead, Devon Hamilton, because because the Jaguars are so tight against the cap. Armstead might be the one to go because of how important Hamilton is to the run defense. So that tends to lead me to believe they want more of like an undersized three tech because it's just adding another type of pitch to your arsenal. It's adding another type of pitcher. You can't have everybody win with speed to power, and they'll start to track on, which is exactly what happened when the Jaguars lost games. They didn't really have another change up pitch to their pass rush arsenal. So I think adding a guy like Grayson Halton in round three, early day three, if he falls that far, Chris McClellan. If they really want to take a swing in day three, Caleb Proctor for Southeast Louisiana might
Mm.
be the most athletic defensive tackle at the combine, but might barely get 280 pounds. So it just depends on how you view what the Jaguars want to be with Eric Armstead and Devon Hamilton still sort of being cap questions. But I do think there are opportunities for them to add a defensive tackle, especially on day two, if they choose to.
Well, I think they need to add like regardless, because like my kind of read is that like Hamilton and Armstead will probably both be on the roster for one more year and then be released next year, just because I think it makes like way more sense financially to do it that way as opposed to like cutting ties a little bit prematurely just in terms of their contracts. But either way, like if one or both of them are gone next offseason, like you need to start kind of planning ahead. And like obviously, like we saw from the Seahawks Super Bowl, like you can never have too many defensive linemen. It's not a bad position to overinvest in. I'm also very curious, JP, on your thoughts on the cornerback position because I feel like I've seen a ton of mock drafts for the Jaguars where their first pick, the 56th overall in the second round, they used to address a cornerback, which I think like cornerback and secondary in general, like are certainly like up there in terms of like Jaguars needs for the offseason. But I also think that like obviously now we all saw the news from CBS Sports, your guy, Jonathan Jones, saying that Travis Hunter is expected to be a full-time cornerback, more so with like a little bit of offense mixed in 2026. That's not really a surprise to anyone, or at least not in Jacksonville. But so you've got Travis Hunter as one expected starter at cornerback. Jordan Lewis, I think, is another expected starter, and then Jarian Jones. I think like when you have multiple or more than two cornerbacks on the field, like I think he's played well enough certainly to be able to be on the field, whether in the slot or outside. And so like maybe like you can add competition to compete with Jarian for sure. Like I'm not against that, but I think Jarian Jones has played like very well at like a starting caliber level starting caliber level, if not better. And so, what are your thoughts, JP, on like how badly the Jaguars need to add to the cornerback position, but then also like how it relates to the depth of the position in this year's class?
I think they could stand to add depth, but if you're going to day two to add depth, I don't think that's a good like use of your draft capital. If you're
Yeah.
spending a 56 overall pick on a guy that's probably not going to play a large majority of snaps, because like you said, Travis Hunter is going to play more defensive back than he is receiver this year, so that's one of your cornerback spots. Then you had Jarian Jones, who, like you said, played really well outside for the Jaguars last season. He's going to take up another outside cornerback spot, or he can rotate with Jordan Lewis. You have guys that can sort of be that matchup versatile at corner. So you really only need guys that are like depth just in case you one of those guys gets hurt, or just in case Travis Hunter needs a breather because he was just on defense. That screams more to me day three pick at cornerback instead of day two. And I think that this cornerback class, I think there's some really interesting prospects. I think there's a little bit of variance because there's a lot of injuries in the group. Because, Jamal McCoy is going to be around one guy, missed all of 2025. Mansour Lane, Avion Terrell, all going to be round one prospects. But I think as you get later down the board, there's some really interesting players. Thaddeus Dixon from North Carolina, Charles Demings from Stephen F. Austin, both guys that were impressive at the Senior Bowl. A guy that I have sort of circled in terms of like this combine could be really good for him or it could be really terrible is Florida's Devin Moore.
Mm,
Super long, super athletic, cannot stay healthy. Like that
yeah.
is the biggest thing. Like you see him play and you can see the talent is just cannot stay healthy. So if he falls to day three, I do think the Jaguars would be really interested in taking a flyer on him. Dalen Everett from Georgia is another guy who is probably going to run really fast, but I think he's going to stick to more day three. But I think they address corner like later because of depth. I think if you're focusing on any position in the secondary on day two, it is safety.
Yeah, I feel like that would definitely make sense. I've wanted them to have like a playmaking safety for years now. I feel like every offseason I'm like, what's Buda Baker looking like? What's his market looking like? Is he how old is he getting? But yeah, like I feel like for cornerback, like the Jaguars should try to be more so focused on like finding the next Monteric Brown as opposed to finding the next Tyson Campbell. So we seem to agree there. JP, that was really all the questions I had for you. I don't know if you have any other thoughts, or I guess one other one I'm kind of interested in hearing from you is if you have any like potential trade up targets for the Jaguars, or either trade up targets for like maybe just a little trade up in the second round, or even guys that you think could fall to the Jaguars at the 56th pick. Because I keep thinking about Braden Fisk. He fell to the 39th pick for the Rams a couple years ago, and I think it was pretty much entirely because he had pretty short arms. And I feel like we could see something similar for the Jaguars because they're like much more worried about intangibles as opposed to and less so about measurables, at least relative to most of the league. And so, any thoughts on guys that are like going to go probably early day two that you like as a fit for the Jaguars?
So I think all these guys are probably gonna be at the safety spot, which is very
I
funny.
love
But
it. I love it.
Emmanuel McNeil Warren from Toledo is a guy
Mm.
that I would trade up for the Jaguars. He is a playmaker. It doesn't matter like where you put him. I think he's much better coming off the roof, which sort of it might ask you a little bit of questions about his fit with he and Antonio Johnson, who are both jumbo jet size safeties. But he can match with tight ends. He can match with slot defenders, and the ball production out of Toledo speaks for itself. He's forced the second most fumbles in the NCAA this season. He gets his hands on the football, and coming off the roof in that quarter half coverage, he's gonna go and try and hit stick somebody. I was really impressed with his tape. I do think he's a little bit of a freelancer when it comes to his run fits, when it comes to his assignments. He's gonna just go out and try and do something. But I think with NFL coaching, that can really help him out a lot. Genesis Smith from Arizona is a guy that I think would be a huge help in this defense. His tackling is a little bit of again, there's a little bit of variance with his tackling, which is why I don't think he might be on the highest list for the Jaguars. But I do think his range is unmatched in this draft class. He has the best range when it comes to being a true center field safety, which is something the Jaguars don't really have and haven't really had in a long time. That ability to go from hash to sideline or hash to post and go and make a play on the football, and they don't really have that in their current safety room. I also think of a guy like Traden Stukes, who probably won't be the trade up prospect, but that's the guy that I want. Also out of Arizona, I have been preaching the Arizona double dip
Mm.
for months now. Been
Okay.
saying like if they're there at 81 and 88 or 56, 81, however you want to get Stooks and Genesis Smith, just go grab them both because they play really well off each other. Stooks is more of a like hybrid, like nickel safety. I think there have been people who rank him at outside corner if you wanted to, but the ball production and the fluidity, like he has the best ball skills of any safety in this draft class. So very excited to see him at the combine. When it comes to guys up front, I think potentially if Lee Hunter does not get drafted in round one, I could see the Jaguars moving up for him.
Mm.
That is sort of your 1-to-1. We're gonna get big, and we're gonna be able to continue to stop the run while also having the potential to rush the passer as well. I do think he's a guy that I'd be fascinated if they do try and go up and move up for. Um, I'm a little curious who they move up for on the offensive side of the ball because it seems
Mm.
like the offense is very set. But I just thought of this now. It'd be very weird fit. But like if Kenyon Sadiq somehow falls into day two,
Yeah,
why
dude.
not just build the boat out of 12 personnel and just beat the crap out of everybody? Like I
Why
think
not?
that'd be sick. Like why not just make a strength even more of a strength? But I think if there's anybody they're trading up for, I do think it's on the defensive side of the ball. I wonder how they view their edge group right now, especially because it's all very like they're all power pitchers. They're all
Yeah.
winning with speed to power. I wonder if they want another like changeup guy, but they've tried that with Yasir Abdullah. They've tried that with Nick McLeod. I wonder, do they keep going to that well to try and find that guy? If they do, I think a guy like R. Mason Thomas makes a lot of sense. Especially if he's still on the board. Maybe later on in day two, Jay Sean Barham is a guy that basically is sort of 1-to-1, the same thing as like Yasir Abdullah and Nick McLeod. Former linebacker off ball at Michigan, moved to edge during the season. And he just sort of plays like a guy that's like, yeah, I'm just going to be faster than everybody else. Doesn't really have like the technique down to play edge, but he has the athleticism to be there full time. Zion Young is pretty much from Missouri, like a carbon copy of what the Jaguars like at edge.
Mm.
6'5", 260, freakishly long arms, wins with power, ready-made run defender. If you just want to keep like going to the factory of big, long, tall, strong, then I could see it. I could see them being aggressive for one of those guys. But it really depends on what you think this edge group needs or what this defensive line group needs. And if they need somebody that wins with a little bit more speed, I wouldn't be surprised if they moved up for a guy like R. Mason Thomas or a guy like Cassius Howell if he falls out of round one. Akeem Mesidor if he falls out of round one due to age. Like that could be your like change up pitcher in this draft class.
Yeah, I definitely agree where like they have a lot of power rushers right now, especially on the edge. So like it makes sense to get one of those bendy guys that you were talking about at the top of the show. And I think especially in free agency because like A, there's guys available. You could get bring back Yannick Ngakoue. You could get Mafe from the Seahawks. Like there are a few speed rushers available in free agency, and then in the draft that allow you just be a little bit more flexible. If you want to go get Zion Young and just keep the factory going, then you can. And then almost the same for safety because I definitely want to see them invest further invest in safety even after they brought in kind of two guys that they expected to be the starters last offseason. Definitely want some safety investments. I think it probably makes sense to invest in free agency just because I feel like it's kind of like an undervalued market and like it's always I mean like safety is always one of like the tougher positions to scout, I feel like. And so like if you can like get a hit on someone in free agency, then great. And then that's just more draft capital to be able to use on the trenches. But JP, I'll definitely be joining just whatever the charge, the whatever you I'm blanking on the word, but the propaganda for a safety with the Jaguars as first pick. I love that. I love all the names that you provided. Very much appreciate that in your time today. JP, make sure you guys check out JP's work at CBS Sports and the Pushing the Pile podcast. But that'll do it for this show. Like I said, I'll have Shipley on probably next week to break down the combine. JP, any other thoughts or like work you want to plug or what's your favorite drill? Is there a drill that gets you like fired up and you're like, man, I just love watching the offensive lineman bench press or anything like
Oh,
that?
it's running the hoop for defensive linemen.
Yeah,
They get the big hoop out there. It's running the hoop. That's the one that's gonna get me fired up every time.
that's a great one. All right. Until next time, appreciate y'all. Appreciate JP. We'll be back on the Duval 22 podcast. Adios.